Good afternoon. Firstly, thank you, Jody, and thank you for introducing me, but also thank you for putting up with me at Japan. I don't think the Sapporo Beer Factory or the onsen will be the same. My study topic was more food, less earth, so I was looking at interactive, sort of intensive agriculture and trying to debunk the 600 million urban farms that are out there at the moment and what that might mean for our $9.2 billion horticulture industry, and in particular what that might mean for vegetables, because I actually run a horticulture operation myself. Firstly, I have to thank the William Buckland Foundation. Without them, I don't think the trip would have been possible at all. They're a benevolent trust. They do a wonderful job and they support a lot of scholars and also people just that want to increase their agricultural knowledge. Jim, Jody, Felicity now, and Nicola. Thanks for all the support that you've provided me over the last 2 years. My GFP team, we've made it. Thanks for putting up with me. Thanks for all the support, long life friends. Drew up there's nodding his head. And most importantly, Jill, my now wife. Since when I got back from my GFP, I had to marry her or there would have been all kinds of consequences. But she really did support me, and she you know, the travel is long, and yeah, she stayed at home. So when we go to a supermarket these days, this is where we get our food. This is what we see, most of us. And I thought it was really important to talk about this first, because we have to understand our consumers and what they're acquiring before we look at any type of agriculture, because I think that as farmers, sometimes we get stuck not understanding that customer that actually uses our product. Over the last 100 years, we've built an industrial food system. We've built a system that major food brands have grown and told us what to eat. But the trend's changing. Over the last 5 to 10 years, major food companies have lost, in the US, have lost over $18 billion of market share. And people are starting to look at food in a different way. Throughout the study, I found this Deloitte study, and it sort of encapsulated my now beliefs about where urban agriculture is going. In the past, as consumers, we really looked at three things. We looked at price, we looked at taste and convenience. There are three drivers, but recently we've got new emerging drivers that people are starting to look at. Health is one. We really care about what we're putting in our body and where it's coming from. Interestingly, I read a study about the local produce. People actually want more local produce than organic. Safety, safe produce, we learned about that in Japan after Fukushima, which I'll explain a bit in my case studies. And I can say that Australia has some of the safest produce in the world, and we really have to focus on that to support our consumers. Social impact, being in the horticulture industry, the biggest social impact that we've seen in recent years is high labour. I'm sure everyone's here has watched the Four Corners episode about Bayada chicken and all the stuff that's happened there. That hasn't stopped, and it's a big focus. And I always get asked as a grower, you know, what's all that about? So we have to really focus on ethical labour as one aspect. And experience. Over the last 8 years, food has become so social. It's no longer meat and three veg. You know, it's everyone's going out, entertaining. You know, especially in Melbourne, where I'm from, there's a big culture. And I think the green circle around that whole diagram explains transparency. I think I've learned that there's a real growth in people wanting to know where things come from. And I think that's only going to keep growing. And they're also looking for companies that they can trust, companies with the right values aligned to their own values, especially there's millennials that are coming up, you know, wanting to know. You know, we get people coming down to the farm all the time saying, you know, we're so excited because we didn't know where the nearest herb farm was. So when I started my study, I found this picture and I thought it was quite topical. This is what, you know, when we transitioned as a humanity from hunter and gatherer to a sedentary lifestyle, we actually worked all together in harmony, and we knew where our food came from. You know, you might have been the lady in the back in the paddocks, or the hunk, which I used to be before I did my Nuffield, but at the front setting up. But the point that I'm trying to make here is everything was transparent. We knew where it came from. Today, on my studies, I visited a farm like this in Illinois. basically a vertical farm with LED lights and basically cultivating fresh vegetables. Now, when I entered this and went on this study, I thought, well, I'm going to look at the greatest technology. I'm going to find these guys. But cultivating food isn't all about the greatest technology. And I learned that from studies in Detroit, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn, where we actually found that community gardens were dominating this space, where communities could actually come and get involved in food production. No LEDs, no data, which was quite a surprise for me because that's really what I was looking for. And I think we have to acknowledge this because as a society, and I'm quite privileged to sit on the Victorian Minister of, Shadow Minister of Innovation's panel, and I learn a lot about urbanisation. And in Melbourne alone, we're now 80% urbanised. So 80% of the people in Victoria work in Melbourne. So we need solutions like this so our kids can connect with the food that we so readily connected with in our lives. So who am I? I'm a first generation farmer, so unlike many of you in the room, my dad didn't show me how to grow anything. He showed me how to fix my car after I crashed it because he was a panel beater. And he does work for me now as well, which is quite challenging. He's our hardest employee. I'm the CEO. We produce about 50 different types of fresh herbs. We sell into retail, we sell into hospitality, and we are just now doing a deal to sell into health food as well. I employ about 100 people, and I've achieved many things over my tenure in the industry, which has been about 9 years now. So the common question that I get asked all the time is, how did you enter the industry? And it's this face that sort of reminded me the most when I was putting this slide deck together. It was an angry chef. I was working as a general manager of a fresh produce firm that distribute to cafes, restaurants, function centres like this one here. And one day I got a knock on my door and my distributors came in and said, look, Jan, we're getting all these complaints about herbs. And I didn't really care about it because it was worth about 1% of my total turnover at the time. I was about 21 years old. But they kept coming and I went out there and I discovered that these little leaves, these fancy things that people put on their steaks that I sort of brushed aside, actually define the dishes that they were consuming. So I've gone, this is pretty cool, I'll get involved. And at that time, My Kitchen Rules and MasterChef started kicking off back in 2007. So I found myself in a paddock, and I can tell you that I do not belong in a paddock. I completely failed. There's still a couple of blocks somewhere that I tried to get on a tractor and tried to plough up, and it's all finished. But what I did start to look at, and I tip my hat to all the outdoor farmers out there because it's such a hard job, and travelling around Australia and meeting a lot of farmers, we've got some of the best farmers in the world, and I tip my hat to them. So I started with hydroponics. So I discovered hydroponics, and we started our whole business on 2,000 bunches of basil, and then we also grew outside, and there was a time when we had a crossover between hydroponic and outdoor where I ran this study where I said to myself, all right, let's produce 40,000 bunches of basil. And as you can see, these are some of the results that we got back in 2008. So we had about 10 times less water that we used, about half the space and about 2 weeks less production. I said, you know what, this is a winner for me, and I think this is what I'm going to hang my hat on. So before I sort of get into the case studies, I just want to give you some mechanics about what I learned in the early days, and then show you a little clip, and then I'll tell you about what I found. So I started growing on the top left-hand corner. You can see. Hang on, I've got this. That one there. So nutrient flow systems. That's how we started. We started basically. It's like a channel with water with fertilizer in it. Very common these days. And basically put the plants in there, and then they grow, and we harvest it in 4 weeks' time. When I went on my Nuffield studies, I started seeing a whole heap of different types of hydroponics. So I saw deep water culture out in the desert in California, and that's basically a similar kind of concept, water trickling through, but it's much deeper water. It allows you to have a much more control around your temperature of your water, and also you can aerate the water to remove disease and pests. Then this is our facility here. This is ebb and flow. So very, very popular in Holland. Basically it's a big table that fills with water and then drains, and on an irrigation cycle you can actually control when the plants get the water. This is the most basic system, and I actually saw some of this in cannabis production as well. Very, very cheap. You can basically get a pot. It's like the end of your mop, and you stick it in there, and then basically the plants just suck up all the nutrient straight out of the basin underneath. And then the most advanced is aeroponics, and I'm sure many of you might have heard of aero farms that are now dominating the media with their farms in Brooklyn and also in China now. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go there when I was in New York because they were just launching their farm and they had an embargo, so I couldn't get there. But aeroponics in general has been around for the last 30, 40 years. NASA actually invented a very simple concept. Basically, the root structure is exposed underneath a table, and there's microjets that actually atomize the water and that are continually misting to deliver the root mass what it requires. So then I moved on to greenhouses. So in Australia, we see, in my industry, domes are very popular, medium cost. And also in the berry industry, Costas is spending a lot of money on tunnels, and we also saw tunnels in Japan for the same kind of production. And then over in Holland, we saw gable-style structures where you're starting to get into the high value and high expensive, high capitalisation. But I suppose the cheaper the system is, you've got less control, and the more expensive the system is, the more control. That was the general theme that I found. So why did I do my Nuffield? So I started learning about these technologies, and I said, you know what, I want to launch a 3,200 square metre footprint, or a footprint, as an urban concept for our business, and then I want to benchmark that against the world. And I got the opportunity to do that, and I'm just going to play a clip for you from 2015 about the facility that we launched.
We're here today to both launch a new facility and to acknowledge the support through the Kohls Nurture Fund. Australian Fresh Leaf Herbs was given an interest-free loan from the Kohls Nurture Fund, which has helped to build the greenhouse we see here today.
This is really why we started the Nurture Fund. A small Australian company taking a bold step in terms of innovation, and Kohls been able to help support them.
This launch and this company are a prime example of the innovation which the Casey-Cardinia region actively encourages.
Australian fresh leaf herbs have invested in new technology, new productivity and new efficiency methods that means we get fresher herbs at lower cost prices.
What's fantastic about this technology is that we have shuttles that travel up and down the greenhouse and bring the produce all the way back to the shed, which the employees can just harvest, and there's no need to walk out into a greenhouse or into a paddock. We also have climate control technology that allows us to grow herbs all year round in Victoria. The cloud technology that we've implemented informs the team in the harvest centre what they should be harvesting from where that day, and then also what they should be planting that day. So that means that we keep our greenhouse fully stocked 365 days in the year.
This is transformational for our herb business. This means we can get these products exceptionally quickly to our stores here in Victoria.
The funding that we've received from the Kohls Nurture Fund has allowed us to develop the technology and test it with the knowledge that we have the support of a big customer such as Kohls. We want to expand our operations over the next 12 to 18 months to open a new 30,000 square metre facility, hopefully in the city of Casey. Without the support from Kohls, our future plans just wouldn't be possible. It's such a great time, and the whole team's pulled together, and having John and the Mayor here today has just been fantastic. And look, I'm really excited and pumped about the future. I'm confident that Australian Fresh Leaf will continue to be a leader in our industry, to push the envelope on sustainable farming practices, innovative products, and continue to drive value to our consumers.
So to give you a bit of context about that, yes, Kohls did give us $500,000 of interest-free money to build that facility. We then tipped another $1 million in to start the concept, and it's been producing ever since April 2015. There's been a lot of challenges with it. In line with getting the Nurture Fund grant, we were the second company to get the Nurture Fund grant from Kohls. I also got my Nuffield in the same month. And then I had 4 months to build and launch this facility off a patch of dirt. And then the day after we launched it, I got on a plane and went straight to Ireland and left my whole team with all the mess that I created. So when I got out to Ireland, I obviously participated in the CSC, and then we went on our GFP, and I started looking at my topic again to benchmark that to what we've already done. And as far as urban agriculture is concerned, I really started putting things into five buckets, and that's community gardens, vertical farms, factory farms, rooftop gardens, and small format urban farms that I discovered as well. So I've talked a little bit about community gardens. I'm just going to focus on the bottom four. The first stop that we had was Sky Greens in Singapore. And basically Sky Greens was a concept that, it's like similar to the NFT system that I showed, but it was sort of like on an A-frame, and the channels actually rotated up and down on a simple 1 horsepower water pump. And I like this system. It was quite innovative, but when I actually had a discussion with them, I started understanding that it's quite challenging in other climates of the world, because in Singapore, they're right on the equator, they get a lot of sun straight above them, 365 days in the year. And then when you put something like down into Melbourne, suddenly you're getting a lot of shading and you're getting uneven plant growth due to the uneven photosynthesis. So the other thing that it was very expensive. So although it produced 2,500 plants per 5.5 square metres, it was still about a return of investment of about 8 to 10 years. We then went over to Japan, and I met Spread in Singapore, Spread in Japan, and they at that time were the largest factory farm. Now, just a little bit about factory farms. I did a little bit of research and also spoke to a lot of people from Japan. Factory farms have been very successful in Japan since Fukushima happened, and that's because of the first element that I talked about, and that was safety in produce. So the Japanese have really flocked towards this. But when I went to this facility, it looked amazing. It was all high tech. But it looked really clinical. Like when we think of produce, do we think about people walking around in lab coats and it just didn't feel right. So then I tried to align that back to my consumer thinking, going, well, this is going to be accepted for a little while, but is it going to actually yield the long-term results that we need in horticulture? Again, just like the Japanese, they always over-engineer everything. So this is an extremely long-term investment, but very interesting. This was my absolute favourite, and I've actually been talking to the team at Kohls relentlessly to get this done in Melbourne. It's not really profitable, but it's a fantastic concept, and it's basically Gotham Greens. I visited them. I met with their lead grower, Aaron Fields, and he showed me through their facility. Gotham Greens basically builds conventional greenhouses on top of buildings, and in particular Whole Foods. There's one in Brooklyn that I went to. It's an absolute experience. And I asked him 3 questions. I asked him one real question. I said, well, what are the challenges with this? Tell me what they are. The first 2 I kind of expected. He said, look, it's really hard to get all our goods up and down the escalators because we're sharing a loading dock or a common area with someone else. So I expect that one. Capital returns, he wouldn't disclose them, but he said that they were low. And the third one was the one that amazed me. And it's similar to this experience in Sky Greens in Singapore. He said, look, Jan, we deal with a lot of shading. And I go, what do you mean? You're on top of a roof. You've got plenty of sun. And he goes, yeah, but the Empire State Building is a lot bigger than me. So when the sun goes behind that, we suddenly have uneven growth. So I found that really interesting. But I think this concept is a really great example of showing people in urban societies how food could be grown. I don't think it's ever going to feed us all, but definitely the feeling that I got there was people were just engaging with the food. Freight farm, so I think there's 360 million containers floating around the world, and Brad McNamara, who's the CEO of Freight Farms, decided to produce food in them. Very cool concept. Again, taking some of the simple principles that I talked about earlier, NFT systems that are instead of being horizontal like a table, they're vertical. And the water trickles down and the plants actually grow horizontally towards a light source in the middle. Fantastic concept. It grows about 1,000 heads of lettuce, and it costs about 85,000 US to set up. And about 15 to 20 hours he was claiming that one person could sort of operate it end to end. He's got 100 deployed. I really like the concept, but it doesn't grow all crops, so it's good for soft veg. So what did I learn? And
So I learnt that there's so many systems out there and they're still sort of evolving. I don't think, energy prices are going to change, LEDs are getting sharper, battery storage is getting better, and I think they all have their place. I think we should really look at community gardens as a country and go, well, why don't we do more of that in our beautiful parks that we have? Why don't we embrace Stephanie Alexander in a different way that's doing the kitchen garden in all our schools at the moment that's deployed in 1,700 schools? And why don't we use the technology in vertical farming to actually engage the current millennials that are out there that are Facebooking absolutely everything. And that's what they connect with. And something that we've been doing in our business to actually invest in the technology so people don't feel like they're going to walk around in gumboots and they're going to have an iPad and they're going to understand the statistics behind how basil grows. And I think we always have to be conscious of how our consumers are changing and wanting more information about and the provenance of where their food's coming from. So what are we doing about it? So we've built a new facility and we've got an old facility, and my whole purpose of going on the Nuffield was to have a look at what was out there. And I learnt that, you know what, we weren't that far off. We were pretty good in our thinking, and we're going to go with our new facility that we're building at the moment. That's 5 hectares in Dandenong, which is going to be our national campus. We're going with ebb and flow, but we're also putting a vertical garden in. So we're going to put a vertical garden in as a concept, and then we're going to go the Dutch-style existing greenhouse. And here's an example of our campus. So basically, we're going to put a new function area that looks straight into the greenhouse, and then a whole production area there that integrates with our current method of farming. For me, everywhere I went, it was about the experience with food. And when we think about urban societies disconnecting from food, it's something that I want to bring in our facilities that are only 40 minutes out of town. So when people walk through the front door, they actually can look at 2 million plants growing, and they can experience that and ask questions about that. So that's when you walk through our new facility and our current facility, the first thing that you see is plants growing right in front of you. The function venue that I discussed, obviously, yesterday we had the top chefs in Melbourne visit our site. We have visits once or twice a week from all kinds of industry groups, not necessarily from horticulture. So I really want to build on that and make that a bit of an attraction. And we've been talking to HI about that. And that's a big thing for us as well, because as a first generation farmer, I definitely want to figure out ways that I can give back to the industry. Culture, so I'm showing the offices here that we're designing at the moment. Culture is really big for me. Someone once told me the culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I absolutely agree with that. And today we heard as well that the number one thing that we need to invest in our business is people, and that's absolutely right. And I think for us, it's about developing an environment that supports the culture that we're trying to cultivate as well. And finally, this is in our facility currently on the left-hand side. This is how we harvest. So in essence, we bring the farm to our workers instead of going out to harvest at our farm. We're going to build on that and launch this Fresh Production Centre. And that's it. Thank you.